The blue sun of Taloria cast long shadows across the rocky terrain as Lieutenant James Walker adjusted his breathing mask and checked his compass. He had wandered farther from the Earth diplomatic compound than planned, but the strange rock formations had pulled him onward like a curious child. 6 months stationed on this alien world, and he still found its landscape fascinating. A flash of light caught his eye from the valley below. At first, he thought it might be sunlight reflecting off mineral deposits, but the intermittent pattern suggested something else. Something artificial. "That's not normal," James muttered to himself, adjusting the settings on his binoculars. The magnified view revealed a small spacecraft, its sleek hull marred by scorch marks. Smoke drifted from what looked like the engine compartment. James hesitated. Diplomatic protocols were clear about interfering with local matters, but a crashed ship likely meant someone in trouble. Human instinct won over regulation, and he began picking his way down the rocky slope. The ship was clearly Talorian in design, with the curved architecture and pearlescent finish that marked their technology. As James approached, he could see the entry hatch was jammed halfway open. "Hello? Anyone there?" He called out, first in English, then in the basic Talorian phrases he had learned. A weak voice responded from inside. The words were unfamiliar, but the tone of distress was universal. James squeezed through the narrow opening, his military training keeping him alert for any dangers. The interior was filled with smoke, forcing him to pull his mask tighter. Emergency lights cast a dim red glow across twisted metal and broken equipment. In the pilot's seat sat a Talorian, trapped by collapsed dashboard components. Even in the poor light, James could tell this was no ordinary citizen. The intricate patterns on the being's silver-hued skin and the jeweled bands around the slender neck marked royalty. "I'm here to help," James said slowly in Talorian. "Are you hurt?" The alien's large, faceted eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with pain. "The ship. Sabotage," the Talorian managed in broken English. James worked quickly, using his multi-tool to free the trapped alien. He noticed the delicate crown-like structure partially hidden in the folds of the being's head crest. This wasn't just any royal. This was Princess Ilara, heir to the Talorian throne. "Your Highness, can you move?" James asked, supporting her as she tried to stand. A dark liquid, Talorian blood, seeped from a wound on her side. "Not far," Princess Ilara replied, her voice stronger now. "Communications destroyed. Guards dead." James pressed a clean cloth from his pack against her wound. "We need to get you away from here. The fuel cells could rupture." As if on cue, a warning light began flashing on the remaining functional console. The princess understood immediately, her four-fingered hand gripping James's arm with surprising strength. Together, they stumbled from the wreckage, James half carrying the princess, despite her being nearly as tall as him. They had barely reached safe distance when a loud explosion rocked the valley. The ship's remains erupted in blue flame. "If anyone tried to kill you," James said grimly, "they'll think they succeeded now." The princess gazed at the burning wreckage, her alien features showing an emotion James couldn't quite interpret. "Why help me? You are human." "Because you needed it," James replied simply. "Now let's get somewhere safe before nightfall." The journey back would be challenging. The diplomatic compound was too far, but James knew of a small outpost where they could find communication equipment. It meant crossing difficult terrain with an injured alien princess, but the alternative was spending the night in the open, a death sentence on Taloria. As they began the slow trek, Princess Ilara studied the human with curious eyes. "Your name?" "Lieutenant James Walker, Earth Diplomatic Corps." "James Walker," she repeated, the name sounding musical in her Talorian accent. "I will remember." Little did James know how prophetic those words would prove. In saving Princess Ilara, he had altered the course of 2 worlds, and his own life. Forever. 3 days after the rescue, James stood in the grand hall of the Talorian palace, surrounded by towering crystal pillars that caught the light in hypnotic patterns. The diplomatic team from Earth had rushed him here after Princess Ilara's safe return caused a sensation throughout the kingdom. "Remember, Lieutenant Walker, this is unprecedented," whispered Ambassador Chen at his side. "No human has ever been granted a royal audience of this magnitude. Just follow the protocols we practiced." James nodded, trying to ignore the stares of the assembled Tellurian nobles. Their silver skins seemed to shimmer in the ceremonial lighting, and the elaborate crests atop their heads were decorated with jewels that marked their status. A low, resonant tone filled the hall, silencing all conversation. Two massive doors carved from some iridescent material swung open at the far end. "All stand for His Majesty, King Vorian, Sovereign of Telluria, Guardian of the Seven Moons," announced a court official in perfect English. The king entered with slow, deliberate steps. Unlike the slender forms of most Tellurians, King Vorian was broad and powerful, his skin darker and etched with the lines of age. The royal crest that sprouted from his head extended nearly 2 feet upward, adorned with gems that seemed to pulse with inner light. Behind him walked Princess Ilara, fully recovered from her injuries. She wore formal attire, flowing robes of a material that shifted colors with each movement. Her eyes briefly met James before focusing straight ahead. The Earth diplomats bowed deeply as practiced. James followed suit, keeping his head down until Ambassador Chen subtly signaled him to rise. "Lieutenant James Walker of Earth," King Vorian's voice boomed through the hall without any visible amplification. "Step forward." James advanced to the marked spot on the floor, thankful for the crash course in Tellurian royal etiquette. "You saved my daughter when others would have hesitated," the king continued. "Our worlds may be different, but courage speaks a universal language. It was simply the right thing to do, Your Majesty," James replied carefully. The king made a gesture with his 4-fingered hand that James didn't recognize. Humility, another admirable quality. He turned to address the gathered crowd. "For countless cycles, the royal house of Telluria has honored great deeds according to ancient custom." A murmur of approval rippled through the Tellurian nobles. "Our traditions are clear when one saves royal blood," the king continued. "The savior must be rewarded with our highest honor." Ambassador Chen shifted uncomfortably beside James. This wasn't part of the briefing they had received. King Vorian's voice grew even more formal. "Lieutenant James Walker of Earth, in accordance with the laws of our ancestors, I hereby offer you the hand of Princess Ilara in eternal bond." The world seemed to freeze around James. Had he heard correctly? Was the king offering? Princess Ilara stepped forward, her face a mask of Tellurian formality. But James caught something else in her faceted eyes. Was it resignation? Alarm? "This is," James began, then stopped as Ambassador Chen gripped his arm in warning. "A tremendous honor," the ambassador finished smoothly. "One that requires proper consideration according to Earth customs as well." The king tilted his massive head. "Explain." "On Earth, such unions require consent from both parties and a period of courtship," Ambassador Chen said diplomatically. "Lieutenant Walker is overwhelmed by your generosity but requests time to honor this offer properly." James found his voice again. "Your Majesty, I'm deeply moved by this recognition, but I wouldn't wish to dishonor Princess Ilara or your traditions by rushing such an important matter." The king studied James with an unreadable expression. "Interesting. Your species values choice in these matters." "We do, Your Majesty," James confirmed. Princess Ilara spoke for the first time. "Father, perhaps the human custom has merit. Wouldn't a period of understanding strengthen any bond?" King Vorian considered this, then nodded slowly. 7 days. You will remain as our honored guest for 7 days, Lieutenant Walker. Then you will accept the princess as your reward, cementing the alliance between our worlds." James bowed again, mind racing. 7 days to find a way out of an alien marriage without causing an interplanetary incident. As the formal audience concluded, Princess Ilara caught his eye once more. This time, her look clearly conveyed a simple message. We need to talk. Princess Ilara paced the length of her private garden, crystal flowers chiming softly as she brushed past them. The moons of Taloria hung in the night sky like watchful eyes, bearing witness to her inner turmoil. She had requested this meeting away from the listening ears of the court, and now she awaited the human who had both saved her life and complicated it beyond measure. The garden entrance slid open, and Lieutenant James Walker stepped through, escorted by a single guard who withdrew after a curt nod from the princess. Your Highness, James said with a bow that was becoming more natural with practice. Please, no formalities here, Ilara replied, gesturing to a stone bench beside a pool of glowing blue liquid. Here, I am just Ilara. As they sat, James couldn't help but notice how the light played across her silver skin, highlighting the intricate patterns that seemed to shift with her emotions. She was alien, yes, but there was something graceful and intelligent in her manner that transcended species. I must explain, she began, her English careful but fluent. What my father has done is not a punishment for you. In our history, to be bonded with royal blood is the highest honor any Talorian could receive. But I'm not Talorian, James said gently. That is exactly why I ask you here. Ilara's faceted eyes reflected the moonlight in rainbow patterns. For 10 cycles, I have fought to modernize our traditions, to bring Taloria into the galactic community as equals, not as slaves to customs that no longer serve us. She rose and moved to the edge of the pool, trailing her slender fingers through the luminescent liquid. I was returning from a diplomatic mission when my ship was sabotaged. Those who oppose change would rather see me dead than allow me to succeed my father with my progressive ideas. James joined her by the pool. You don't want this marriage either. Marriage, she repeated the word carefully. Your Earth term is more accurate than our eternal bond, which suggests choice has no place. She looked directly at him. No, I do not want this, but refusing publicly would destroy my father's authority and possibly spark civil unrest. I understand duty, James said. In the military, sometimes personal wishes come second to larger needs. Ilara's crest fluttered slightly, a sign of approval in Talorian body language that James had learned. You understand better than most humans might, she said. I am caught between worlds, Lieutenant Walker. I respect our traditions, but I also believe they must evolve. My father means well, but he sees only the old ways. Call me James, he offered. If we're going to solve this together, we should start with names. For the first time, Ilara's face formed what James recognized as a smile, different from a human's, but unmistakable in its warmth. James, she said, there is something you should know. The eternal bond is not merely ceremonial. It involves a biological component unique to Talorians. She hesitated. Our species forms neural connections with our chosen partners. It is intimate in ways beyond physical. James blinked in surprise. That wasn't in any of the cultural briefings. Few outsiders know this, Ilara explained. I tell you now because you deserve the full truth. Such a bond between different species has never been attempted. The results are unknown. The weight of the situation settled more heavily on James's shoulders. So we really need to find another solution. Ilara nodded. I have been thinking about this since the ceremony. There may be a way to honor tradition while creating a new precedent. Her crest fluttered with excitement. In our ancient texts, there is mention of a trial of worth that can substitute for an eternal bond in special circumstances. What kind of trial? James asked. One that would demonstrate your value to Taloria in ways other than bonding, Ilara said. It has not been invoked for generations, but as royal heir, I have the right to suggest it. Would your father accept this alternative? Ilara's expression grew serious. Only if the Council of Elders supports it, and they will need convincing. She turned to face him fully. James, I need your help not just to solve our immediate problem, but perhaps to change Taloria forever. Will you stand with me? James looked into her alien eyes and saw not a princess or an alien, but a kindred spirit fighting for change. "I'm with you," he said simply. In the garden's peaceful silence, two beings from different worlds began plotting a revolution of tradition. The royal archives of Taloria stood like a monument to time itself, towering shelves filled with crystal data tablets that glowed with stored knowledge. James ran his fingers along the ancient texts, following Princess Ilara through the maze of information. These records detail every diplomatic incident for the past 300 cycles, Ilara explained, her voice hushed in the sacred space. "If there's evidence of who might want me dead, we'll find it here." James nodded, still processing their plan. Over the past 2 days, they had agreed to pursue two paths: searching for proof of the assassination attempt to identify their enemies, and researching the ancient trial of worth that might free them both from the unwanted eternal bond. "Your Highness," a voice called from the entrance. Commander Drell, the head of Ilara's personal guard, approached with a small device in his hand. "The scan results from your crashed ship." Ilara took the device, her expression darkening as she read the display. The fuel regulator was tampered with, a specific type of molecular degradation that would cause catastrophic failure once the ship reached high altitude. James frowned. "That's not something an amateur could do." "No," Drell agreed, his crest flattening in concern. "It requires access to royal technology and advanced knowledge of our spacecraft." "An inside job," James said grimly. Ilara placed the device on a nearby table, her fingers trembling slightly. "My father must be told." "With respect, Your Highness," Drell countered, "we should gather more evidence first. The king is surrounded by advisors who might include our culprit." James studied the commander's face. "You suspect someone specific?" Drell hesitated, then spoke in a lower voice. "Ambassador Torval has opposed the princess's reforms from the beginning. He also oversees the royal fleet maintenance." "Torval?" Ilara's eyes widened. "He's been my father's friend for decades. And he stands to lose considerable power if your modernization plans succeed," Drell pointed out. James recalled the tall, imposing Talorian who had watched him with undisguised suspicion during the royal reception. "We need proof before making accusations against someone so powerful." Ilara moved to a secluded corner of the archives and activated a hidden panel. A holographic display appeared, showing the palace security network. "If Torval is involved, he couldn't have acted alone," she said, fingers dancing across the controls. "Let's check his communications for the past month." James raised an eyebrow. "You can access that." A small smile played across Ilara's face. "I may be traditional in some ways, but I've always had an interest in security systems." The display showed hundreds of communication logs. Ilara filtered them quickly, her trained eyes spotting patterns. "There," she said, pointing to a recurring set of encrypted transmissions. "Communications to an unmarked location outside our capital, always at the same time each night." Drell leaned closer. "That's not diplomatic protocol." "Can you decode them?" James asked. Ilara's fingers worked the controls. "Not completely, but I can extract keywords." The display flickered, showing fragments of messages. "Human interference. Alliance must be prevented. Accident prepared." James felt a chill run down his spine. "It's not just about you. They're trying to prevent an alliance between our worlds." "But why?" Ilara wondered. A new voice answered from the shadows of a nearby shelf. "Because some fear change more than death itself." All three turned to see Ambassador Chen from the Earth delegation stepping into the light. "Forgive the intrusion," Chen said, "but when my lieutenant disappeared into the royal archives with the princess, I thought I should investigate." "Ambassador," James started to explain. Chen raised a hand. "No need, Lieutenant. I've suspected foul play since the princess's accident. There are elements on both our worlds who believe an alliance would threaten their power." "You know something," Ilara stated, studying the human diplomat. Chen nodded gravely. 3 days before your ship crashed, Earth intelligence intercepted a message from a group calling themselves purists. They mentioned a royal obstacle that would be removed from the equation. And you're just telling us this now? James asked incredulously. Intelligence is complicated, Lieutenant, Chen replied. Until I knew who to trust, revealing what we knew might have accelerated their plans. Drell stepped forward protectively. And why trust us now? Chen looked at James and Ilara standing side by side. Because watching you two work together these past days has convinced me that the alliance our worlds need might start with you. Ilara's crest extended fully, a sign of determination. Then we have work to do. If Torval is working with these purists, we need irrefutable evidence. James nodded, a plan forming in his mind. And I think I know how to get it. The four stood amid the ancient knowledge of Taloria, unlikely allies united against a shadow that threatened two worlds. ## Part 5. Cultural Exchange. Moonlight filtered through the high windows of the Royal Garden Observatory, casting blue shadows across the star maps that filled the circular room. James sat across from Princess Ilara at a small table, the remains of their meal pushed aside as they talked well into the night. So on Earth, people choose their own partners? Ilara asked, her faceted eyes reflecting starlight. Based on emotion rather than alliance or advantage. James nodded. For the most part, yes. We call it falling in love, when you connect with someone so deeply that you choose to build a life together. Love. Ilara repeated the word carefully. We have a similar concept, but it's considered separate from bonding decisions. She traced a pattern on the table with her slender finger. Our history taught us that passion fades, but advantageous alliances endure. That's not entirely wrong, James admitted. But humans believe that when you build a partnership on mutual respect and affection, something stronger emerges over time. Their conversation was a welcome distraction from the tension of their investigation. After discovering Ambassador Torval's suspicious communications, they had set a trap to gather more evidence. Now, they waited. Tell me about Earth families, Ilara said, genuinely curious. Do your offspring inherit positions like Talorian children? James laughed softly. Not usually. We generally believe people should earn their place through merit, not birth. Though plenty of families pass down businesses or wealth. Merit over birth, Ilara repeated thoughtfully. That's what I've been fighting for here. The idea that one's contributions should matter more than one's lineage. Is that why you wanted diplomatic reform? Ilara's crest fluttered in agreement. Taloria has avoided true galactic integration for generations. We trade, yes, but we keep others at a distance. She looked directly at James. I believe isolation will eventually destroy us. We need new ideas, new connections. And the purists disagree, James concluded. They see outside influence as contamination, Ilara confirmed. To them, the eternal bond offered to you is already sacrilege. James considered this. On Earth, we've had similar conflicts. People who fear change often cling to tradition as protection. Yet your world embraced space travel, alien contact. Not without struggle, James said. Change is never easy, even when necessary. Their discussion was interrupted by the soft chime of James's communication device. A text message from Commander Drell appeared. Evidence secured. Meeting at dawn. James showed Ilara the message, and she nodded with relief. Then we may have what we need. There's still the matter of the eternal bond, James reminded her gently. Even if we expose the conspiracy, your father's decree remains. Ilara rose from her seat and moved to a crystal cabinet nearby. She returned with an ancient-looking tablet that glowed with symbols James couldn't read. I found it, she said with barely contained excitement. The Trial of Worth. Last invoked 300 cycles ago, when another alien saved royal blood. What does it entail? James asked. The saved royal may propose a challenge that serves Taloria's interests. If the savior completes this task, they earn the right to choose their own reward. Her eyes shimmered with hope. "You could choose diplomatic status instead of bonding. And your father would accept this, if presented properly with historical precedent." Ilara placed her four-fingered hand atop the tablet. It would save face for all involved. James felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "That's brilliant, Ilara." Her name and his voice caused her crest to ripple in what James now recognized as pleasure. The past 5 days working together had created an understanding between them that transcended their different biologies. "There's something else," Ilara said, her voice softer. "In learning about human customs, I've come to appreciate your species' emphasis on choice. It seems wiser than our rigid traditions." "All cultures have wisdom to share," James replied, "and weaknesses to overcome." A comfortable silence fell between them as they gazed out at the stars visible through the observatory dome. The same stars looked down on Earth. James realized, different perspective, same universe. "When this is over," Ilara said finally, "would you help me reform our diplomatic protocols? As an official advisor, not a—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Not a husband," James finished with a smile. Ilara's skin flushed a deeper silver, her species' version of a blush. "Precisely. I'd be honored," James said sincerely. "Though I think Ambassador Chen might be better qualified." "Perhaps," Ilara agreed. "But I trust you." Those simple words, spoken across the gulf of different worlds, carried more weight than any formal alliance treaty could have managed. Dawn approached, bringing with it the promise of confrontation, and perhaps a new beginning for two worlds. Part 6. Confrontation and Choice. The grand ceremony hall buzzed with anticipation. Hundreds of Tellurian nobles filled the tiered seating, their jeweled crests catching the light from the massive crystal chandeliers overhead. Today marked the 6th day since James had been offered Princess Ilara's hand, and the day they would expose the conspiracy that threatened both their worlds. King Vorian sat upon his elevated throne, Ambassador Torval standing confidently at his right side. The royal guards lined the walls, Commander Drell positioned closest to the king with a data crystal hidden in his ceremonial armor. James entered alongside Ambassador Chen, both dressed in formal Earth diplomatic attire. He caught Ilara's eye as she sat in her royal position. Her subtle nod confirmed everything was ready. "Today we gather to honor the ancient traditions of Telluria." King Vorian's voice boomed across the hall. "Tomorrow, Lieutenant James Walker will accept the eternal bond with my daughter, Princess Ilara, uniting our worlds in ways never before imagined." Polite applause rippled through the crowd, though James noted several nobles whose crests remained flat against their heads, a sign of Tellurian disapproval. "Before we proceed with today's ceremony," the king continued, "Ambassador Torval wishes to present a special gift to our human guest." Torval stepped forward, carrying an ornate box. His expression was perfect diplomatic smoothness, but James detected a glint of something cold in his eyes. "Lieutenant Walker," Torval announced, "as chief diplomat of Telluria, I present this sacred relic, a crystal that has been in the royal collection for generations. It is tradition to bestow it upon those who join our royal family." James approached and accepted the box with a respectful bow. The moment had come. "Your Majesty," James said clearly, addressing the king rather than Torval, "before I accept this generous gift, I believe Princess Ilara has a matter of great importance to share with you." Torval's eyes narrowed, but he maintained his composed facade. "Surely any matters can wait until after the ceremonial." "Let my daughter speak," King Vorian interrupted, noticing Ilara's urgent expression. Ilara rose gracefully. "Father, honored guests, I must bring to your attention a grave threat to our kingdom." She gestured to Commander Drell, who stepped forward with the data crystal. "We have discovered evidence of treason against the royal house." Murmurs spread through the hall as a large holographic display activated above the central floor. Communications logs, ship schematics, and decoded messages appeared in sequence. "These records prove that my ship was deliberately sabotaged," Ilara continued, her voice strong. "An act meant to prevent the alliance between our worlds and end my life." The king's massive frame stiffened. Who dares such treachery? Ambassador Torval stepped forward smoothly. "Your Majesty, these claims are outrageous. The princess has clearly been influenced by human. The evidence names you." "Ambassador Torval," James interrupted, his military training evident in his steady voice. "Communications between you and a group called the Purists detail the entire plot." The hall erupted in shocked exclamations. Torval's composed expression cracked, his crest flaring with anger. "Lies," he hissed. "This human seeks to manipulate." "The communications are verified with your genetic signature," Commander Drell stated firmly, "as required by diplomatic protocol." Kane Vorian rose to his full impressive height. "Torval, my friend for 30 cycles, is this true?" For a moment, the hall held its breath. Then Torval's diplomatic mask shattered completely. "Someone had to protect Taloria," he shouted, his voice echoing through the suddenly silent chamber. "Your daughter would destroy everything we are with her reforms and alliances. Our purity must be preserved." Guards moved to surround him, but Torval reached into his ceremonial robes. "The box," James shouted in warning, realizing too late what the gift contained. Torval extracted a small device from his sleeve as chaos erupted. James lunged forward, tackling the ambassador to the ground just as he activated the device. A high-pitched whine filled the air. The box on the ceremonial table began to glow with dangerous energy. "Get back," James yelled, dragging the struggling Torval away from the artifact. Ilara rushed forward, her scientific training taking over. She quickly assessed the device and made a decision. With practiced movements, she sealed the box in a containment field moments before it would have detonated. The guard secured Torval as Kane Vorian descended from his throne, face dark with fury and betrayal. "Your Majesty," Ilara said, standing tall beside James, "this human saved my life twice now. Not for reward or advantage, but because it was right." The king looked between his daughter and James, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. "Lieutenant Walker," he said finally, "it seems Taloria owes you a debt greater than we realized." He turned to the assembled nobles. "And it appears we have much to reconsider about our traditions and our future." In the aftermath of chaos, a moment of truth had arrived. The time for choice was at hand. The 7 moons of Taloria shone brilliantly in the night sky, illuminating the palace's grand balcony where hundreds of Talorians and a small delegation of humans gathered. 1 full week had passed since James Walker had saved Princess Ilara, and the time had come for the king's final judgment. Kane Vorian stood majestically before his throne, which had been moved outdoors for this historic occasion. The events of the previous day, Torval's treachery and attempted assassination, had shaken the kingdom to its core. Nearly a dozen conspirators had been identified among the royal court, all now imprisoned beneath the palace. James stood in the center of the gathering, dressed in a formal uniform that blended Earth military styling with Talorian colors, a gesture of respect created by the royal tailors overnight. Princess Ilara stood nearby, her royal attire more subdued than usual, her expression serene but determined. "People of Taloria," Kane Vorian began, his powerful voice carrying across the assembly without need for amplification. "For 10,000 cycles, our traditions have guided us. They have protected us through wars, natural disasters, and first contact with alien species." The crowd rumbled with approval, crystal crests shimmering in the moonlight. "But traditions that cannot bend," the king continued, his tone shifting, "eventually break. Yesterday, we witnessed where rigid adherence to the past can lead, to fear, to hatred, to violence." A hush fell over the assembly. Such words from their traditionalist king were unprecedented. "Lieutenant James Walker of Earth," the king addressed James directly, "you were offered my daughter's hand according to our oldest customs. Tomorrow would have been your bonding ceremony." James bowed respectfully. saying nothing. However, the king raised one four-fingered hand. Princess Ilara has invoked an ancient provision, the trial of worth. She has petitioned that you be allowed to choose your own reward for saving royal blood. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Many of the older nobles looked concerned, while younger Tellurians seemed intrigued. This provision has not been invoked for 300 cycles, the king explained. Yet its existence proves our ancestors understood that sometimes tradition must yield to wisdom. The king gestured to Ilara, who stepped forward and placed an ancient crystal tablet in James's hands. "Lieutenant Walker," she said formally, "you have completed the trial of worth by exposing a conspiracy against the throne and preventing a second attempt on royal life. According to our oldest laws, you may now name your reward." James looked down at the glowing tablet, then up at the faces watching him. The moment felt heavy with significance. What he said next would affect not just his future, but potentially the relationship between two worlds. He stepped forward and addressed the king. "Your Majesty, I am honored by the original reward you offered. Princess Ilara is extraordinary, intelligent, brave, and visionary." He glanced at Ilara, who tilted her head in acknowledgement. "But I believe both our worlds deserve something more meaningful than a single bond between two individuals." James raised his voice to address the entire assembly. "For my reward, I ask for two things. First, that Telluria and Earth establish a permanent diplomatic exchange, not just of ambassadors, but of scientists, artists, and teachers. Let us learn from each other as equals." Approving murmurs spread through the crowd, especially among the younger Tellurians. "And second," the king prompted, "that Princess Ilara be granted the authority to reform Telluria's interspecies relations as she sees fit. Her vision for your world's future may have frightened some, but her wisdom and courage have already saved Telluria once." A moment of silence followed. Then King Vorian did something no one expected. He laughed, a deep, resonant sound that echoed across the balcony. "In all our recorded history," he said, "no one granted the choice of reward has ever asked for something that benefited others more than themselves." He looked at his daughter with newfound respect. "You were right about humans, Ilara, and perhaps about many other things as well." The king turned back to James. "Your requests are granted, Lieutenant Walker, and I add one more reward. You shall be named first human ambassador to Telluria, with all rights and privileges thereof." Cheers erupted from both humans and Tellurians. Ambassador Chen looked positively delighted, already calculating the diplomatic opportunities this presented. As the formalities concluded and the celebration began, James found himself beside Ilara at the balcony's edge, looking out over the glittering city below. "You could have asked for anything," she said quietly. "Power, wealth, technology." James smiled. "I asked for what mattered." Ilara's crest rippled with emotion. "The eternal bond would have been complicated between our species, but perhaps friendship between us might be simpler." "I'd like that," James replied. "Though simple isn't the word I'd choose for anything involving a princess who fights assassins and reforms thousand-year-old traditions." Ilara's laugh was like crystal chimes in the night air. Behind them, humans and Tellurians mingled, cautiously at first, then with growing ease. A new tradition was being born, one built on choice rather than obligation, on respect rather than fear. And as the 7 moons of Telluria washed over the gathering, two worlds took their first real steps toward understanding one another.